In a smoky room in Berlin, Hermann Göring, the flamboyant second-in-command of the Third Reich, leaned back with a mocking smile. The Americans, they only know how to make razor blades and refrigerators. Nothing more. To him, the United States was a clumsy giant of consumer goods, incapable of transforming its factories into weapons of war. His laughter echoed like a verdict, dripping with arrogance. But soon that laughter would be drowned out by the roar of industry across the Atlantic. In Richmond, California, welding torches spat showers of sparks against the night sky. In Baltimore, shipyard cranes swung enormous prefabricated sections of steel into place. In Portland, unskilled men and women, farmers, waitresses, miners, and mothers only months before now marched into shifts that never slept. From these yards emerged something the Nazis never expected: the Liberty ship. Ugly square and slow but unstoppable, the SS Joseph N. Teal launched in just 10 days. The SS Robert E. Peary shattered records completed in only 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes, and behind them came thousands more. By war's end, 2 710 Liberty ships would roll off American slipways, each one carrying grain trucks, fuel or tanks across oceans once ruled by German U-boats. Göring had laughed at the idea of American industry, yet the sight of endless Liberty convoys stretching from horizon to horizon proved that America's so-called razor blades could cut deeper than the Reich ever imagined. When Göring mocked American industry, his words were rooted in a widespread belief among Axis leaders. They saw the United States as a nation of consumers, a society addicted to luxury goods and comfort. In their eyes, refrigerators, automobiles, and Hollywood films defined America, while cannons, tanks, and steel fleets belonged to the hardened powers of Europe and Asia. What they failed to grasp was that this very consumer base, this sprawling network of factories and workers, could be redirected with breathtaking speed into an arsenal unlike anything the world had ever seen. The situation in 1940 was dire. Britain stood alone, battered by the Luftwaffe, starved by German U-boats that prowled the Atlantic with lethal precision. Convoys of merchant vessels were being torn apart. Food weapons and raw materials never reached English ports. Winston Churchill himself admitted that the U-boat menace was the only thing that truly frightened him. Without supplies from across the ocean, Britain could collapse, and with it the last foothold of resistance against Hitler. It was against this backdrop that America's shipbuilding revolution began. Even before Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt and the U.S. Maritime Commission recognized the looming disaster. The plan was audacious: build merchant ships faster than U-boats could sink them. This was not about luxury, elegance, or naval prestige. It was about raw numbers, about creating a conveyor belt of steel hulls that would outlast and overwhelm Germany's submarine fleet. The chosen design was not glamorous. Derived from a British model, it was modified and Americanized by the naval architects at Gibbs and Cox. Officially known as the EC2 SC1, the ship measured over 400 feet in length, capable of carrying more than 1,000,000 tons of cargo. It was slow chugging along at 11 knots and powered by a triple-expansion steam engine that seemed outdated even in 1941. But this was deliberate. The design prioritized simplicity, affordability, and most crucially, mass production. To achieve this, American engineers embraced methods unheard of in traditional shipyards. Instead of painstakingly riveting every plate, the Liberty ships were welded. Welding cut production time dramatically, though at first it led to accidents like brittle fractures and hull cracks. Problems that might have paralyzed other nations became lessons for America. Engineers investigated, reinforced, and adapted, turning setbacks into stepping stones toward faster, more reliable production. The other secret was prefabrication. Like assembling a giant puzzle, different sections of the ships were built in separate workshops and then brought together at the slipway. A Liberty ship was not constructed piece by piece, but assembled in massive blocks, bows, sterns, decks lowered into place by towering cranes. This modular system mirrored the techniques that Henry Ford had perfected in the automobile industry, now scaled up to forge the arteries of global war. Henry J. Kaiser, a construction magnate who had never built a ship before, became the poster child of this transformation. In Richmond, California, his shipyards turned out Liberty ships at a pace the world could barely comprehend. Entire families worked side by side, husbands and wives, fathers and daughters. Women poured into the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking up welding torches and riveting guns. The iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter was not confined to aircraft factories. She was just as present in the shipyards, where sparks lit up the faces of women who had once been secretaries, clerks, or farmhands. Kaiser's innovations were not limited to machinery. He introduced social systems to support his workforce, establishing on-site childcare canteens and medical clinics. From these shipyard hospitals grew Kaiser Permanente, a healthcare system that would outlive the war and reshape American medicine. In this way, the Liberty Program was not only a military necessity, it was a social revolution. Other shipyards across the country joined the effort. Bethlehem Fairfield in Baltimore became one of the largest shipbuilding centers in the world, its waterfront a forest of cranes. Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation, California Shipbuilding, and countless others turned sleepy docksides into roaring industrial cities. At their peak, these yards employed hundreds of thousands of workers running on shifts that never ceased. The war demanded 24 hours of effort, and America delivered. The statistics were staggering. Before the war building, a cargo ship could take nearly a year. By 1942, America slashed that figure to weeks. By 1943, days. Newspapers reported the launches like SportScore's new ship in 10 days record, shattered 4 days from keel to launch. The SS Robert E. Peary became a legend, completed in just over 4 days. Though such feats were publicity stunts, they proved the principle America had made shipbuilding a science of speed. Yet this was not a story of smooth progress. Early Liberty ships faced embarrassing failures. The SS Schenectady famously cracked in half while moored in calm water, a shocking reminder of the risks of welding on such a massive scale. Critics howled that the program was reckless, producing brittle coffins for sailors. But the US response was swift, and relentless engineers redesigned joints, strengthened hulls, and introduced new testing standards. Each mistake became fuel for improvement, and production never slowed. By the end of 1941, the first Liberty ships were entering service. By 1942, they were sailing in convoys across the Atlantic, their holds packed with everything Britain needed to survive: wheat-canned meat tanks, jeeps, aircraft parts, and fuel. Each ship was a floating lifeline. Each voyage carried the hope of a free Europe. For the Axis, this development was a creeping nightmare. German intelligence underestimated the scale of American mobilization. They reported shipbuilding numbers that seemed exaggerated, even impossible. And yet, month after month, the Liberty ships kept coming. For every vessel a U-boat sent to the bottom, another 2 or 3 were already sliding down American slipways. What began as a desperate gamble soon became a tidal wave. Liberty ships were not merely replacing losses, they were outpacing them, tipping the balance of the Battle of the Atlantic. By mid-1942, the United States had begun to prove what Göring and his peers refused to believe, that American industry was not a sleeping giant but a juggernaut awakening with thunderous speed. In the space of months, the world's view of America shifted. The nation once mocked as soft and indulgent was now harnessing its wealth and manpower with brutal efficiency. And at the heart of this transformation stood the Liberty ship, plain, unglamorous, yet destined to become one of the most important vessels in human history. The United States did not merely build ships, it industrialized the very concept of shipbuilding. Traditional maritime construction was slow, artisanal, almost ceremonial in its pace. Wooden scaffolds rose around hulls, riveters hammered in cadence, and vessels took shape over long months, sometimes years. But America in 1942 could not afford tradition. It needed a revolution, and the Liberty ship became its engine. The scale of the transformation was staggering. Imagine steel arriving by rail from the vast mills of Pittsburgh and Gary, Indiana. Flat cars groaned under the weight of plates that only weeks before had been iron ore pulled from Minnesota's Mesabi Range. Those plates did not linger. They were cut-welded and stamped with dizzying speed. Instead of flowing slowly into a single slipway, they were diverted into workshops where prefabricated modules were created, giant puzzle pieces of a ship's anatomy. A bow section here, an engine room block there, a completed deckhouse waiting in a yard. At the shipways, massive cranes, some rising higher than 20-story buildings, swung these blocks into place with theatrical efficiency. To onlookers, it was as though ships were being assembled out of giant toy bricks. What had once been a year-long endeavor now collapsed into weeks, then days. This was not an overnight miracle. It was the culmination of ingenuity, organization, and sheer human determination. Henry J. Lieblen and Saito, Kaiser epitomized this. A man known for building dams and highways, he had never constructed a ship before 1940. Yet his confidence was unshakable. If he could organize thousands of men to pour concrete across a river valley, he could organize them to weld steel across a hull. He introduced assembly line discipline, relentless scheduling, and a culture that demanded solutions, not excuses. Kaiser's Richmond shipyards became a legend. Here workers labored under floodlights that turned midnight into day. They came in shifts, endless tides of humanity streaming through factory gates, their lunch pails rattling, their boots striking in rhythm. Many had never seen a ship before, let alone built one. But the training was quick, almost brutal in its brevity. Welding schools churned out new workers by the thousands. Posters proclaimed a Liberty ship in every slip, and workers took that slogan as a personal mission. Among them were women pouring into industrial labor at an unprecedented scale. Rosie the Riveter became a national symbol, but in the shipyards she was more than propaganda. Women with bandanas tied tight against their foreheads crouched beneath hulls, welding arcs flashing like stars. Housewives became electricians. Teenagers became crane operators. Entire communities reshaped themselves around the shipyards, with daycares, cafeterias, and even medical clinics sprouting up to sustain the war effort. These clinics would later evolve into Kaiser Permanente, one of the most influential healthcare systems in America. Here was the unexpected legacy of the Liberty program, not only ships, but new social structures. The industrial war effort rewrote the very fabric of American life. The results were astonishing. In 1941, the average time to build a Liberty ship was over 200 days. By late 1942, it was down to less than 60. By 1943, the average was closer to 40. Records fell like dominoes. The SS Joseph N. Teal was built in 10 days. The SS Robert E. Peary shattered imagination 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. These records were partly publicity stunts, but they proved the point: America could build faster than Germany could sink, but speed came at a price. Early Liberty ships suffered from brittle fractures. The most infamous case was the SS Schenectady, which cracked in half at its dock in Oregon during calm weather. Photographs of the broken hull spread like wildfire, fueling critics who claimed America was sacrificing safety for haste. Yet rather than retreat US, engineers confronted the problem. Metallurgists studied the fractures, improved welding techniques, and redesigned structural joints. Within months, solutions were in place. Where Germany might have paused production, America pressed forward, learning while building and correcting flaws on the fly. Each Liberty ship was unique in its details. Some were fitted as tankers, others as troop transports, still others modified for carrying aircraft or tanks on deck. But the principle was the same: simplicity, utility, and speed. Each was armed with a small array of defensive guns, an aft-mounted 4-inch or 5-inch gun, a few 20mm. Oerlikons, enough to deter but not defeat U-boats. Their real weapon was numbers. A single ship was vulnerable, but convoys of dozens constantly replenished became an oceanic juggernaut. The workers knew this. They understood that every weld, every shift, every sleepless night mattered. Some painted slogans on the sides of ships delivered on time Hitler's nightmare. Launch ceremonies became patriotic festivals. Brass bands played politicians, gave speeches, and families cheered as champagne bottles shattered against the steel bows. These ships were not elegant liners. They were blunt instruments of survival. But to the people who built them, they were miracles, proof that ordinary citizens could hammer back against tyranny. The Liberty program became a symbol of American democracy at work. No single tycoon or general could claim credit. It was the collective effort of welders, riveters, machinists, engineers, and shipyard clerks, men and women, black and white immigrants and natives, all bound by the urgency of war. In an ironic twist, the very society Göring dismissed as soft and divided was demonstrating unprecedented unity and resolve. By the close of 1942, the shipbuilding machine was fully operational. America was no longer building ships one at a time, it was mass-producing them like automobiles. The assembly line logic of Detroit had been transplanted onto the waterfront, and the results shook the Axis to its core. The message was unmistakable. While Göring's laughter faded into the shadows of Berlin across the Atlantic, sparks still rained down from shipyard welders, each one a promise of another Liberty ship to come. By the end of 1942, the Liberty ship was no longer an experiment, it was a lifeline. The war at sea had reached its most desperate stage. German U-boats hunted relentlessly across the Atlantic, surfacing under moonlight to unleash torpedoes against helpless merchantmen. Convoys burned in the night, their flames lighting the waves like floating funeral pyres. Sailors clung to debris, their cries swallowed by cold water and silence. To many in Britain, survival seemed uncertain. But behind this curtain of despair, an industrial miracle was underway, one that would flood the oceans with steel hulls until the U-boats themselves were drowned in numbers. Every Liberty ship that slid down a slipway represented not just cargo capacity but defiance. The holds were cavernous, able to carry 9,000 tons of goods, wheat for London jeeps, for Montgomery's 8th Army fuel, for bombers' locomotives, for Soviet railways. Some ships carried entire prefabricated docks, others tanks lashed to decks or aircraft in crates waiting to be assembled overseas. They were floating warehouses, blunt and ungainly, but indispensable. The routes they sailed were perilous. Convoys bound for Murmansk braved Arctic storms and Luftwaffe bombers. Liberty ships, their decks coated in ice, steamed stubbornly through frozen seas to deliver Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union. Others plied the Mediterranean, threading through U-boat ambush zones to supply the invasions of North Africa and Sicily. In the Pacific, Liberty ships hauled everything from bulldozers to ammunition, enabling Marines to storm island after island across a vast ocean. The German Naval Command watched with alarm. Admiral Karl Dönitz, master of the U-boat fleet, believed he could strangle Britain into submission. For a time, his strategy seemed terrifyingly effective. In early 1942, when America was still reeling from Pearl Harbor, U-boats prowled the American coastline almost unopposed. Tankers exploded in sight of New York City's skyline. Beaches from North Carolina to Florida were littered with oil and debris. German sailors called it the second happy time. But the Liberty ship was changing the equation. Losses at sea were grievous, yet for every ship sunk 2 or 3 more entered service. In January 1942, American yards launched 7 merchant vessels. By December, they were launching 140. The arithmetic was merciless. Dönitz's wolf packs could sink dozens of ships in a month, but the American machine could replace them faster than they were destroyed. The Reich had underestimated the simple truth industry could be a weapon, and America's arsenal was vast. Convoy escorts multiplied as well. British corvettes and American destroyer escorts bristled with sonar radar and depth charges. Long-range patrol aircraft B-24 Liberators and PBY Catalinas closed the air gap in the mid-Atlantic. Special radar sets high-frequency direction finding, and the deadly Lee light turned nighttime into a hunting ground for Allied planes. U-boats that once surfaced with impunity were now ambushed, bombed, and broken apart. For the men aboard the Liberty ships, life was a mixture of monotony and terror. Days of endless grey sea were shattered in seconds by torpedo strikes. A single hit could tear the ungainly vessels in half. Crews slept in lifebelts, knowing survival time in icy waters could be measured in minutes, yet morale endured. Merchant sailors painted defiant slogans on their bows, "This ship fights we deliver," or simply "Hitler's coffin." The convoys became symbols of Allied determination. Imagine the sight: 50 or more Liberty ships ploughing through heavy seas, their wakes blending into one vast, churned trail guarded by warships weaving protective patterns around them. Overhead aircraft droned in slow orbits, their eyes fixed on the horizon. These were not glamorous fleets like Nelson's at Trafalgar or Yamamoto's at Midway. They were industrial convoys, columns of floating steel boxes. Yet they carried the fate of nations. Nowhere was their impact more dramatic than in North Africa. In November 1942, Operation Torch required the transport of nearly 1,000,000 troops and vast quantities of supplies across the Atlantic. Liberty ships formed the backbone of that fleet, carrying Sherman tanks, trucks, and munitions that enabled the Allies to challenge Rommel in the desert. From there, they sustained the campaigns in Sicily and Italy, ensuring that Allied armies never ran short of fuel, food, or ammunition. On the Eastern Front, the story was no less striking. Stalin himself admitted that without American trucks, his armies could not have fought with such mobility. Liberty ships delivered tens of thousands of Studebaker trucks, railway engines, and raw materials that kept Soviet industry alive, even as German forces ravaged its western territories. Each Arctic convoy was a voyage into hell, icy storms, constant attack, and the grim knowledge that a single torpedo could spell disaster. But they sailed on their decks, creaking under snow, and steel their crews frostbitten but unyielding. The turning point came in May 1943, known to history as Black May. That month, the U-boat fleet suffered catastrophic losses, with 41 submarines destroyed. The hunters had become the hunted. Air patrols improved escort tactics, and the sheer resilience of the convoys forced Dönitz to pull his wolves from the North Atlantic. The Liberty ships had not defeated the U-boats alone, but their relentless numbers had ensured that the Allied lifeline was never broken. From that point onward, the tide was irreversible. Liberty ships poured across the Atlantic in waves, building stockpiles in Britain for the coming invasion of Europe. They carried the men and material that would storm Normandy in June 1944. They hauled fuel and ammunition to supply the Red Ball Express, the legendary convoy system that sustained Patton's dash across France. By late 1944, the Liberty ship was everywhere. In Pacific lagoons, they anchored as floating supply bases. In European ports, they unloaded mountains of crates, barrels, and vehicles. In frigid northern seas, they braved storms to keep the Soviet armies armed. No theatre of war was untouched by their presence. The irony was bitter for Göring and his peers. What they had dismissed as razor blades and refrigerators had transformed into an unstoppable tide of steel. America had turned its consumer culture into industrial warfare, proving that abundance could be a weapon. Each Liberty ship was proof that numbers mattered more than elegance, that the simplest vessel repeated thousands of times could change the fate of the world. The convoys carried not just supplies but symbolism. To Allied soldiers waiting in foxholes or advancing through ruined cities, the steady flow of food and ammunition was invisible yet essential. To German commanders, reports of yet more Liberty ships entering service were demoralizing, a constant reminder that they were fighting not only armies but the might of an entire industrial continent. By the time the war neared its climax, the Liberty ship had earned its reputation as the ship that won the war. From the Arctic Circle to the Coral Sea, its blunt bow and square silhouette became a familiar sight, a reassurance to Allies, a nightmare to Axis. And all of it was born from the laughter of a man who could not imagine that America's so-called razor blade factories might forge the steel tide that would drown the Reich. The spring of 1943 marked the most decisive moment of the Battle of the Atlantic. For over 3 years, German U-boats had stalked the sea lanes, their commanders boasting that they could starve Britain into submission. Each torpedoed freighter was another nail in the coffin of Allied hope. Yet what Admiral Karl Dönitz and Hermann Göring had failed to grasp was that America's Liberty ships, rolling off the slipways in a torrent of steel, were about to tip the balance of the war. Convoy after convoy pressed forward across the Atlantic. Picture the scene: endless grey seas, gales howling, and waves towering over the bows. In the center of those convoys churned the blunt silhouettes of Liberty ships, their decks loaded with tanks under canvas crates stacked high, and gun crews manning their modest 20mm oilicons against the shadows of unseen predators. Around them circled destroyer escorts, Canadian corvettes, and British sloops, each vessel armed with radar and sonar, each crew grimly aware that somewhere ahead lurked wolf packs eager for blood. For a time, the wolves had feasted. In March 1943, convoy HX 229 and SC 122 were mauled in mid-Atlantic, with more than 20 merchant ships sunk in a single running battle. To observers in Berlin, this looked like vindication. The U-boat arm seemed unstoppable, but even as those merchantmen sank, American shipyards were replacing them faster than ever. Within weeks, new Liberty ships launched with fresh cargoes ready to cross the same waters. The arithmetic was merciless. Germany could never sink them as fast as America could build them. Then came May 1943, Black May. It was the month when the hunters became the hunted. Allied intelligence, bolstered by codebreakers at Bletchley Park, began to anticipate wolf pack movements. New radar systems detected periscopes. Long-range patrol aircraft B-24 Liberators fitted with radar and depth charges closed the deadly air gap in the mid-Atlantic. Suddenly, the ocean was no longer safe for the U-boats. Convoy ONS-5 became the turning point. Attacked by more than 30 U-boats, it seemed doomed. But this time escorts fought with deadly precision. Radar-equipped destroyers tracked submarines through the fog. Hedgehog mortars rained explosives into the depths. Aircraft swooped in at dawn bombs and depth charges, crushing steel hulls beneath the waves. By the end of the battle, the Allies had lost 13 ships, but the U-boats had lost 7, a shocking reversal. And it did not stop there. Throughout May, German submarines fell in droves. 41 U-boats were destroyed that month alone, the worst losses ever suffered by Dönitz's fleet. The proud admiral, once convinced that he could throttle Britain's lifeline, now faced the collapse of his offensive. "We are at the breaking point," he admitted. 1/3 of his operational boats had been lost in a single month. The Atlantic, once a hunting ground, was turning into a graveyard. What made this collapse truly decisive was not just the new weapons or improved tactics, it was the sheer resilience of Allied shipping. Every Liberty ship that joined a convoy meant more supplies reaching Britain, more tanks for Montgomery, more bombers for Harris, more trucks for Stalin. For the Axis, this was an industrial nightmare. Göring's scornful laughter about razor blades and refrigerators was now a bitter memory, drowned out by the thunder of Liberty convoys, steaming unhindered across the ocean. In Britain, the change was palpable. Where once rations had been tight and supplies uncertain, now warehouses filled, fuel depots brimmed. Armies prepared for offensive operations on a scale not seen since 1918. In Washington, the Maritime Commission celebrated the staggering numbers. Hundreds of Liberty ships launched each month yards, competing to break records, workers boasting that Hitler himself could not keep pace with their welders. Torches. The Liberty ship became more than a vessel, it became a symbol. Newspapers printed photographs of convoys, stretching to the horizon, declaring that America had built a bridge of steel across the Atlantic. Sailors joked that the ships were ugly, a yard long and a mile wide, but they respected them nonetheless. They knew that without those steel hulks, their comrades in North Africa, Russia, and soon Normandy would starve for supplies. The climax of the Atlantic struggle was not one dramatic battle, but a cumulative realization the U-boat menace had been broken. Liberty ships sailed not without danger, but with confidence. Losses dropped dramatically after Black May, while launches continued at record pace. Germany had lost its chance to sever the Atlantic lifeline. The Allies now possessed an industrial advantage so overwhelming that victory was only a matter of time. On the German side, the mood turned grim. Dönitz withdrew his battered fleet from the Atlantic to regroup. Hitler raged, unable to comprehend how his submarines, once terror of the seas, were being annihilated. Göring had no answer. His laughter about American industry seemed pathetic against the roar of Allied shipyards, where sparks still rained from welding torches, birthing yet another Liberty ship to replace each loss. From that moment forward, the initiative at sea belonged firmly to the Allies. The path to D-Day was clear. The beaches of Normandy would one day be supplied by Liberty ships, unloading mountains of equipment. The Red Army would be fueled by American trucks carried in Liberty holds. The Mediterranean would be flooded with supplies for the push into Italy. All of it stemmed from the victory in the Atlantic, a victory made possible by the relentless tide of Liberty hulls. Black May 1943 was the climax, the hinge of the war at sea. In the cold depths of the Atlantic, the dreams of Dönitz's wolf packs were shattered, and with them, the Reich's hope of starving Britain. In the glow of welding arcs across America, the Liberty ship reigned supreme. From then on, Göring's laughter was silenced by the echoing horns of convoys that stretched from horizon to horizon, proof that America's factories had turned ridicule into the hammer blow of victory. The Liberty ship program did more than build vessels, it built victory. When the smoke of Black May cleared and the wolf packs slunk back to their bases, the full implications of America's shipbuilding miracle began to unfold. What started as an emergency measure to keep Britain alive had by 1944 become the central artery of Allied global warfare. Without Liberty ships, there could have been no D-Day, no island hopping across the Pacific, no Red Army fueled by American trucks. With them, the Allies achieved the mobility and logistical depth that crushed the Axis. The most visible impact came in June 1944, when the greatest armada in history assembled off the coast of Normandy. Behind the warships and landing craft were dozens of Liberty ships, their cavernous holds packed with fuel, artillery shells, and rations. As the invasion unfolded, they unloaded onto makeshift harbours, sustaining the lodgment in France. The Allies had learned the bitter lesson of World War I, that battles could not be won without supply. Thanks to Liberty ships, supplies did not run out. Within weeks of the landings, Allied armies were rolling inland with a torrent of material that the Germans could neither match nor destroy. But the Liberty ships' legacy went far beyond that single moment. Throughout 1944 and 1945, they continued to deliver the lifeblood of war munitions to the Soviets' vehicles for Patton's Third Army food for liberated populations. When Patton's advance across France threatened to outrun its supply lines, the Red Ball Express, an improvised truck convoy system, relied entirely on fuel and trucks delivered by Liberty ships to British ports. Every gallon of gasoline in those barrels, every tire rolling along French roads had once crossed the Atlantic in the steel belly of a Liberty. The numbers alone tell the story. Between 1941 and 1945-2710 Liberty ships were built. Together they carried roughly two-thirds of all cargo shipped to the Allies during the war. This staggering achievement was not glamorous, but it was decisive. The Liberty ship was never designed to impress. It was designed to endure, to deliver, to outnumber. And it did. On the German side, the significance was equally clear. The U-boat fleet had been intended as a strategic weapon capable of knocking Britain out of the war, but the sheer mass of Liberty production rendered that strategy obsolete. No matter how many submarines prowled the seas, they could not stem the tide. By the time German shipyards attempted to produce newer, faster U-boats, the war had turned irrevocably against them. Göring's laughter had become an epitaph for the Reich's failure to grasp the true nature of modern war. Not finesse, not even tactical brilliance, but logistics on an industrial scale. The Liberty program also reshaped American society. Women, minorities, and immigrants played indispensable roles in the shipyards. Rosie the Riveter became a cultural icon, but the reality was broader African Americans fought for and won expanded opportunities in industrial labor. Mexican Americans joined the effort in California yards. Elderly workers previously thought too old for heavy industry found themselves welding seams and operating cranes. This democratization of labor left a lasting mark on post-war America, accelerating demands for civil rights and social equality. Henry Kaiser's innovations in worker welfare proved equally transformative. The medical clinics established for shipyard workers evolved into Kaiser Permanente, pioneering a model of prepaid healthcare that would shape the future of American medicine. Child care centers at shipyards demonstrated the necessity of supporting working mothers, planting seeds for social debates that would continue long after the war. The Liberty ship program thus not only secured military victory but also rewrote the social contract at home. Internationally, the ships lived on as well. Many Liberty ships survived the war and entered civilian service, hauling goods for decades. Some were sold to other nations, forming the backbone of post-war merchant fleets. Others were used in reconstruction efforts, delivering supplies to shattered Europe and Asia. In this way, the Liberty ship became part of the Marshall Plan, the physical embodiment of American commitment to rebuild a broken world. Their steel hulls carried not just cargo but hope, transforming instruments of war into tools of peace. Of course, not all memories were glorious. For sailors who served aboard the Liberty ship was often uncomfortable, noisy, and frighteningly vulnerable. They remembered nights spent listening for the torpedo that might never come, or the terrifying hiss of steam when engines strained in heavy seas. But they also remembered the sense of mission, of being part of something larger than themselves. Many merchant mariners believed they were the forgotten warriors of the war unsung compared to soldiers and pilots. Yet history increasingly recognizes that without their sacrifice none of the Allied victories would have been possible. The Liberty ship also stands as a lesson in wartime innovation. It was not the product of cutting-edge design but of pragmatic compromise. Engineers simplified wherever possible, sacrificing elegance for speed. Critics sneered at the ungainly silhouette, the lack of beauty, the limited lifespan. Yet in their ugliness lay their genius. By standardizing parts, by modularizing construction, by welding instead of riveting, America proved that efficiency could triumph over perfection. That lesson resonates even today in industries that prize adaptability and mass production over craftsmanship. By 1945, when victory finally came, the Liberty ship had become a legend. It symbolized not only America's industrial might but also its resilience. Göring's mockery about razor blades and refrigerators had been transformed into a bitter irony. The very factories that once produced consumer goods had been turned into engines of war, overwhelming the Reich with a tide of steel. The Liberty ship was America's answer to doubt its declaration that laughter would not stop a determined nation. Even decades later, when many Liberty ships were scrapped or retired, a few survived as museum ships. Visitors walking their decks today can still sense the ghosts of welders, sailors, and dockworkers who made history. They can still hear, if they listen closely, the echo of a ship's horn cutting through Atlantic fog, the sound of America's industrial heart beating across oceans. The Liberty ship's significance cannot be overstated. It was not glamorous, not beautiful, not even particularly fast. But it was there in overwhelming numbers, carrying the tools of liberation to every corner of the globe. It proved that mass speed and determination could shatter even the fiercest blockade. And it ensured that the laughter of tyrants would be drowned forever in the thunder of American industry. History is often remembered for its great battles, charismatic generals, and glittering machines of war. Yet sometimes the true key to victory comes in shapes so plain, so unglamorous, that even enemies laugh at them. The Liberty ship was one such vessel. When Hermann Göring dismissed American industry as nothing more than a maker of razor blades and refrigerators, he believed he was voicing a truth, that a society of consumers could never muster the harsh steel required to win a global war. He was wrong. The irony could not be greater. The very consumer-driven industries Göring scorned became the foundation of America's wartime miracle. Automobile plants shifted from cars to tanks and trucks. Refrigerator factories retooled to build aircraft components, and on the waterfront shipyards learned from Henry Ford's assembly lines to turn shipbuilding into mass production. The result was 2710 Liberty ships, ugly, boxy, slow, and yet unstoppable. These ships became the pulse of the Allied war effort. They carried wheat to starving Briton tanks to the deserts of North Africa, jeeps to France, and fuel to the advancing Red Army. They were the arteries through which the lifeblood of war flowed, binding together continents and allies. Soldiers may have fired the weapons, but Liberty ships delivered them. Without their endless convoys, no campaign could have been sustained, and their story was not just one of steel, but of people. The welders in Richmond who had never seen an ocean before. The women in bandanas who balanced childcare with 12-hour shifts in the yards. The merchant sailors who braved icy waters, always one heartbeat away from a torpedo strike. Together they embodied a nation's transformation, a society that turned ridicule into resolve, mockery, into momentum, laughter, into victory. The climax had come in Black May 1943 when U-boats began dying faster than they could kill. But the significance stretched far beyond that month. From that point onward, the outcome of the war was no longer in doubt. Logistics, not ideology, would decide the conflict. America, with its endless stream of Liberty hulls, had built a bridge of steel across the oceans. The aftermath of this achievement reshaped the world. In Europe, Liberty ships supported not only victory but recovery. Many sailed under foreign flags after 1945, rebuilding global trade. Some became the backbone of merchant fleets in nations devastated by war. Others carried food and supplies as part of the Marshall Plan, helping to rebuild the very countries America had fought. They became vessels of peace after being instruments of war. A few remain preserved today, floating monuments to industrial might. Visitors stepping aboard the SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco, or the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore, can feel the echo of history beneath their feet. The creak of steel, the smell of salt, the sight of cramped cabins all whisper of an era when ordinary people armed with torches and determination built ships faster than an empire could sink them. The lesson endures in modern warfare. Production and logistics matter as much as courage on the battlefield. The Liberty ship is a reminder that wars are not only won by brilliant generals or heroic charges, but by welders in overalls, clerks tracking, cargo manifests, and shipyard nurses tending exhausted workers. It is the triumph of the collective over the individual, of scale over spectacle. For the Axis, it was a bitter revelation. Göring's laughter had symbolized arrogance, the kind of hubris that underestimates both the enemy and the power of industry. For America, the Liberty ship became the retort, a steel chorus of horns sounding across the Atlantic. Each launch, each convoy, each safe arrival was another nail in the coffin of Nazi dreams. By the war's end, those two 710 ships had carried millions of tons of cargo, millions of miles across dangerous seas. They were never meant to last, designed for just 5 years of service, but many endured for decades. Some worked into the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds, testimony to the resilience of their simple design. Others rusted away quietly in reserve fleets, their duty done, their story remembered only by the sailors who had trusted them with their lives. But in truth, their story is all of ours. The Liberty ship was the embodiment of a democratic arsenal built by the many for the survival of the few, then the triumph of the many again. It was an answer to tyranny, a symbol that no amount of laughter or ridicule could stop a determined people from rising to the challenge. So when we think of World War II, we might picture the thunder of artillery at Normandy, the roar of B-29 seconds over Tokyo, or the clash of tanks at Kursk. Yet beneath it all ran a steady, unbroken rhythm, the sound of Liberty ships' engines churning across the oceans. That rhythm carried victory. That rhythm silenced Göring's mockery. That rhythm changed the world. In the end, Göring had laughed at American industry. But history has the last word. And the last word is written not in laughter but in steel. 2710 Liberty ships, the bridge of victory, the fleet that turned mockery into triumph.